Hello and welcome to She Leads Collective podcast. I'm Mary Gregory and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is a space for honest conversations about what it really means to lead as a woman today and how we can all show up with more courage, care and clarity. You'll hear from inspiring women, powerful allies and bold truth tellers who are changing the game, not by playing tougher, but by leading smarter, softer and stronger. Hello and welcome to this episode of the She Leads Collective podcast. What does it take to become a female CEO in the male-dominated tech industry? Well, today's guest is going to tell us all about her experiences. Today, I am delighted to welcome Angela Bishop, who in my opinion is a fantastic role model of female leadership and who is someone who brings energy, authenticity and a refreshing dose of candour to every room she enters. Ange is the CEO of Zühlke UK, part of the Swiss tech innovation powerhouse. With over 20 years in technology consulting, she's built her career at the intersection of software engineering, leadership, and inclusive workplace culture. She's also a global adventurer, a mum of two, and a fierce advocate for equity in leadership. I first met Ange when she presented at one of LHH's Elevating Women in Leadership programmes at ThoughtWorks. I remember thinking, this is a woman who is a great example of leading with both head and heart. Ange is also a great advocate for inclusivity. And it was a joy to hear her share her story, which is one of the reasons I asked her here today. Her career is impressive, but it's her commitment to empowering teams and championing change that really stands out. In this conversation, I hope that we get under the skin of what it takes to lead authentically in tech, how to navigate bold career moves, and why inclusion isn't just a nice to have, it's a leadership imperative. Ange, it is so good to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
No problem, Mary. It's so good to be here. I'm happy to be part of your podcast.
Oh, I'm delighted. And I don't, I take your time seriously. You're a busy CEO. So to give up your time and talk to me is wonderful. So, we're going to sort of do a bit of exploration around your career and around your motivations today, because I think your story is going to inspire but also inform many of our listeners. But I'm curious, let's go right back to your childhood. What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you think, I want to be a CEO of a technology company?
It's a good question, actually, because I was joking about this with someone only like a few months ago. And I think obviously back then I didn't know what titles were or, a software company was or anything like that. But I kind of knew that I liked leading teams and I liked being in charge.
When did you find that out?
I think, my mum's nickname for me was Queenie. So I think quite young because, and I remember also a school report card at one point, and I have a picture of it on my phone actually, that said, Angela shows strong leadership ability. I think this was when I was about 7, but she needs to temper that with tact. So I've been also working on my style for a while because I think that's also important as well. So, I think, I can't really say that I really wanted to know that I wanted to be a CEO from a young age, but I knew definitely that I was super curious about businesses and how they ran. And yes. I also knew that I was good at being the kind of galvanizing member of a team, bringing people together. And I remember also one of my friends told me, you need to kind of run a company or something like that, and I think it developed over time. Once I'd actually gotten into business after university, I realized actually, yes, I do want to understand how to lead a company. Yes. And that could be a really good ambition. And it was not based on power or control. It was sort of based on more curiosity, how would I make all these different things work together? How do I make this successful? How do I get people motivated? So it wasn't built on I get to make the decisions. It's built on curiosity, I think is
and I love that, because to me that indicates a lack of ego, because it's not so much about I want to do this to be a big person and a big I am. It's doing it because actually I'm really curious about how these things work together.
Yeah, and I think that's also something that's driven me to sort of stay in consulting as well, because you get to see so many other different businesses as well, like all your clients' businesses. So I get to see retail businesses, energy businesses, how public sector, which is, you know, totally different, travel and transport businesses, you know, financial services businesses, like all manner of businesses. I get to kind of understand how they think about their business and how they delight customers, so, you know, and serve their customers, how they make money, how they don't make money in some cases, and give back. And I think that's also part of it that's driven me there, is that just general curiosity about, oh, how do you make that work? And learning from these different businesses and bringing it into the mix also in a consulting business, but then using that to also share that with other clients, you know, without necessarily, you know, obviously not giving away people's confidential information, but it's just like understanding like these things are really working well to provide these specifics in a business, you know, and you can take that those themes across many businesses as well. So that's also very interesting.
Absolutely. And a real openness to learning is what I hear.
Yes, yeah, and I think you have to be, like, because everything's changing so quickly these days. I think if you're not willing to learn as you go, I think you get a bit stuck.
Yes.
And I don't learn through reading books or listening to podcasts in the same way others do, or studying, you know, going back to university. I'm a very practical learner. I learn through doing, I learn through watching other people, I learn through other people's stories. And I also learn through just asking questions like, how did you do that? Or how does that work? Or things like that. So I'm a very practical learner, I'd say. And so I learn that way. So I'm just always interested in thinking, okay, what else could I, you know, learn today? And you know, if I learn something every day, then that's great, you know. If I don't, that's also fine. But yeah, it's nice to do that. And I think always, like, when, let's say, when you have like a new joiner in your company, I always think, oh, I'm going to learn something new, you know, because they're coming from somewhere else, have a different experience, have a different background. What could I learn from them?
Yes, because they can have the freshest eyes, aren't they?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a different perspective.
Yeah,
So
fantastic. So from a young age, you absolutely had an aptitude towards leadership. You certainly have an enthusiasm and a keenness and curiosity to learn. So tell us about your career then, and tell us about your career journey.
yeah, so I went to an all-girls school. So I'll start there, because then there was quite a juxtaposition. Then when I went to university, I studied information technology, majored in software engineering, and was one of very few women. So it was mostly men, like by far. I
So a
don't
real
even think for
contrast.
very huge contrast for me. And obviously, so I had to very quickly understand like how to operate in that mode and how to be resilient in that mode. I was lucky enough to have a lot of lecturers that were, and tutors that were women, actually, and that's why I chose that university, because the main person leading that faculty was actually a woman, which was not which are pretty unheard of at the time. To lead a sort of the technology area of a university, being a woman, which is great. And I'm actually still in contact with some of my lecturers today. So so I did that for a few years, and then I started off working in the public sector in Australia. That's where I'm from. Looking in the health part, like in hospitals, doing software for hospitals and patients and doctors and things like that. And obviously, yeah, very quickly, one of few women in that department, building software for the hospital. And then I definitely wanted to travel. I definitely didn't want to stay in Australia. So I moved over to the UK, and was very fortunate enough to have some family over here, which, helped me sort of set up and everything. And that's when I actually started working at another health software company very briefly. And then I started working at ThoughtWorks. And and I think through that journey, I got to work with lots of different clients, learning their business, learning how I can help deliver great software that supported them, their business, and their customers. I think that's the biggest bit. But I think very early on, I knew that, like, I was more curious about the business I worked in, not just the client's business.
Yeah.
And I remember one day the CEO at the time had come to visit us at the client site and then written me a really nice email after, just saying like, I think you're doing a really good job and the client's given you really good feedback. And I replied with a bit of a tongue in cheek that, you've got to take these risks sometimes. I'm glad I'm on my way to taking your job from you one day, with a
Wow.
smiley face,
Yeah.
which I think not many people would write to the CEO at the time, but I knew him enough to kind of make a joke. And then I didn't hear back. And I was like, oh, I've made a really bad choice here. Maybe my joke's gone too far.
I can
Um,
just imagine
um,
what was going on in your head.
and I just thought he'd find it a nice joke reply, going, yeah, great, whatever. I got a call a couple of weeks later going, congratulations, you've been put on the Global Leadership Development Program, and he will be, his name's Trevor, he will be your sponsor, and you'll get an hour with him a month.
Wow.
So that risk was definitely worth taking, because
Yes.
then for 6 years he became my mentor, and I got an hour with him every month. And
Fantastic.
he's obviously running a global company, so that was really very fortunate to be able to be
And
in
he
that
sponsored
experience.
you. So he sponsored
Yeah.
you and he was your mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
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 And so from that point on, he sort of advised that, that actually I just need to have empathy for all the different parts of the business. I need to understand how each of them need to operate and then how then they come together. Because if I wanted to kind of be a CEO, I needed to understand not just how they work together, but what they did inside. So I went on this journey of going, okay, well, I look after a team at the moment, but it's a delivery team. How do I amplify that by looking after, say, it from a more sales perspective, or for multiple teams at the same time? And then how do I do things that are in the operational part of the business? So how do I move in and temporarily do some operational roles?
Hmm.
So I did sort of in consulting, staffing as a really key part of the business. So I did that for a while. Then I went over to Ecuador and helped start an office over there. So that was a whole different experience again. So I guess I went on this kind of journey of making sure I couldn't go to every area of the business, but just have a little bit more understanding of how some of those different parts operated. And then also made sure I was curious about the different parts that I didn't get to
Yes.
experience firsthand. And then, make sure I understood and understood where they're coming from in these situations. And then obviously over time, how they all came together. And then I
Yes.
think and then the other thing you have to do, as a running a CEO, is you have to make the business, you have to run the business, make it profitable, make money, and that's fundamental. So I then moved into looking after sort of multiple clients, or a portfolio of clients, and show how I can manage that, manage them, and look after the revenue side, but the profitability side, the teams that were involved, and that kind of thing. And then that's sort of where what led me to sort of building up, I think, the experience that I think I thought I needed, but I was guided to need. And then obviously lots of other little different things along the way
Yes.
as well.
Yes. So I'm hearing from this from quite a brave and cheeky
Yeah.
decision and action that you took. A whole 6 years of development
Yeah.
came your way. You were
Yeah.
supported to really grow into what was needed to be a CEO.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is why when I look back on it, and give advice to others now, I'd say vocalize what your goals are. I mean, I
Yes.
think you've heard me say that to the teams in the leadership program. You have to vocalize like what you want to do, because if you
Yes.
have a goal and you don't tell anyone, no one knows to help you. But
Yeah.
if you can vocalize it in a way, whether it be like a bit tongue in cheek, or like really formal, I think it just helps, because then people can give you the right feedback and the right guidance. And
Yes.
I don't know anyone that doesn't want to help someone with their career goals. They might not have time to help them all the time, but I don't know anyone that doesn't want to help someone else,
Yes, yes.
really. So
There's something to be said, isn't there? If you're committed to helping others be successful, you will be successful
yeah,
yourself.
absolutely.
And that is clearly demonstrated in business in so many areas, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so true, because I think as a leader, you're only as good as your team,
Yes.
and your job as a leader is to basically create an amazing team.
Yeah.
And that's how you're successful, basically. If that's the fundamentals. That's your main job, is to have a great
Yes.
team. Part of it is is uplifting them. Part of it is giving them learning opportunities. Part of it is also some of the hard stuff, which is also telling them feedback that
Yes.
sometimes they you don't want to give freely, but you have to.
Yes.
And or just hard truths about certain situations. But ultimately, you're there to motivate them and give them the opportunities for them to be successful. And sometimes that also means that they that they then thrive.
Yes,
So
yes. So ensuring your team's success is absolutely fundamental.
yes.
And so I'm also wondering though, we're talking about the really positive things, the support you got. This is fantastic. What about some of the more challenging things? I'm also curious, I suppose this is my bias as well. I'm curious about how you navigated bias because you were or you are in an industry that is very male dominated. And I'm sure that you're surrounded by wonderful male colleagues. But there are inherent biases that we all
Hmm.
hold, and I
Hmm.
just wonder how you navigate these.
Yeah, I think there's a few instances I can kind of recall that really were moments I think that shaped a little bit about how I thought about this. And of course, as you said, like I had really good both male and female mentors, so I was very lucky to do that. And I know that a lot of people that worked around me really cared about me and cared about what I wanted and knew that and obviously I vocalize these things, so I'm not shy about that. Um, I think there's one where it's about feedback. So I think feedback is really important to accept and to take. But in a situation where you're a minority, like in the case of, there's very little females in a more male-dominated industry, a lot of that feedback is given to you or worded in a way that sort of comes across like you need to be more like a guy in that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah,
And it's not malicious or anything like that. It's all very well thought, it's done from a good place, basically. But I think what I recognized is that in taking the feedback just at face value, I was then finding I was adjusting things that I was doing that didn't feel comfortable for me, for my
yeah,
authentic self, for my personality. I like, I'm quite bubbly and like optimistic, and I like wearing bright clothes, and and I felt sometimes it was just like they were trying to sort of get me to be more serious or this, and or I needed to be more like I don't know, a bit more blunt about things, and I am pretty blunt but sometimes in my own way. And anyway, I think when I reflected on that, I was like, actually, this isn't working for me, the way that I'm accepting the feedback and not necessarily then working out how I then adjust so I'm still me. And I remember there was a certain point, and I think I've spoken about it with others before, where I remember practicing for this huge presentation or pitch that we were doing for this client. And it was a really big deal. It was sort of one of these like make or break deals for a company. And we'd flown in people from other countries for it. It was that sort of big. And I was one of the lead people pitching. And we'd all got together in the week leading up to the pitch to kind of practice this pitch over and over again. And I remember I just, kept messing up a few things, and they kept giving me feedback, and I was like, right, I need to just go into a room and just be like, how am I me? Because I know that if I can be me in this pitch, I will land it, because all the people that are there from the client side, they already know me, they know the good work that I was doing at the client already, and I'd been working there for some months. And I really had to think about that, because I kept being like, oh, you need to say it like this, or you need to not be like, and I know it was all like superficial stuff, but it felt really uncomfortable. And I got to a point
yeah.
where I was just messing up because I was so uncomfortable.
It sounds
Um,
very confusing, actually.
yeah, yeah, it can be, I think. And this is where I reflected. I remember going home and just thinking, right, I need to be totally me in this pitch to feel comfortable. It's a really long, multi-hour pitch. I need to feel like this is, and there was a moment where I realized that I need to take the feedback and accept it, of course, but then work out how I then implement it in my own way, not implement it necessarily on exactly the advice given. And
Mm,
that was a really big turning point for me in realizing that I need to be me.
mm,
Otherwise, I'm not going to be successful, because I'm
mm,
just going to I'm going to clam up, or I'm going to forget what I'm supposed to say, because I'm just thinking about all the things I'm supposed to be doing, but I totally feel uncomfortable.
mm,
So that was one of the key things I think that I've then taken through in everything I do now. Even now, I think about it daily. It's like, am I feeling? I've got a big presentation. I've got this podcast today. How am I going to feel comfortable? Like, to be me. Another probably area of resilience, or how I navigated this, is like, when you've had a really tough time and realizing that careers aren't a ladder, and realizing that they are almost like waves that might go up and down. So I've had moments where I was like, felt like I was progressing, and then all of a sudden I'd go for something new, and then you'd have a setback. And
Yes.
you'd think that was like the end of the world at the time, but actually recognizing that maybe that was a good thing, and moving a sideways a little bit first was a good step.
Yes. So it doesn't
Um,
always have to be a vertical ascendant. You can
exactly.
go horizontal sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might have to go back before you go forward again, because you might be building up a new skill set, or learning a new different area of a business, or changing roles,
Yes.
and you might have the experience and leadership skills, but then you need core skills the other way. So you will probably accelerate in those changes more quickly, but you need to go back to go forward. Um, and I think that's another thing that you need to I think I came to terms with earlier on. I think partly because in consulting you kind of change projects and change clients, so you get that kind of experience of trying different things. So you realize that some work and some don't, and then and you kind of realize where you prefer to be. Um, and then I think probably the other thing is putting yourself in really difficult, challenging situations, and then working out how you cope with those, and then learning from those. So one of mine, I think we've spoken about before, is when I moved to Ecuador.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
um, I mean, I didn't speak the language at the time. I had to do 2 hours of tutoring every day, to try and up my language skills quite quickly. Navigating a new culture, work culture, coming from a kind of London work culture, which is obviously quite, there's the bar sets very, very high in London in particular. Um, and I think that was incredibly challenging, not just from a language perspective, but from a cultural perspective. I had to really adjust my understanding about how different cultures view work versus
Yes.
life. And it's actually, they provide some good lessons, right? Because I probably was a lot more focused on work, and definitely still had life, but like really was plowed a lot into work. And I think I learned from that actually you do need to prioritize other things sometimes,
Yes. Yes.
But initially I found that really challenging when that was sort of the default, was that a priority of life over work sometimes.
So the
Um,
difference between living to work and working to live.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And I think
Yes.
lots of people have different perspectives on that. But that was sort of a big shift for me. And
And
then,
how
yeah,
did you cope? Because it sounds like, that was a tough time. You didn't speak the language. I mean, goodness knows, you didn't speak the language. The culture was incredibly difficult, or not difficult, but different. Difficult's the wrong
different,
word.
yeah.
Different, very different, and sounds wonderful in some ways. But how did you keep going through all of those challenges?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of perseverance. There was tears for sure,
Yeah.
because, I think I was sort of coming home at the end of the day, utterly exhausted, because I'd done, work for the day in a mixed language. So I was, also trying to speak Spanish at work, then doing 2 hours of, tutoring to up my language skills. And I was, my brain was exhausted trying to, work out all these different things. And I was away from home. It was obviously my husband came with me, but we were all away from our normal friends and family, trying to kind of create another group of friends there. Um, and I can't, it was definitely a lot of tears. There was definitely a
Mm.
lot of doubts for sure. And I think when I look back on it though, that was so crucial to some stuff I took away. At the time, I thought it was a disaster. That's
Interesting.
because like I was just struggling, and I'd never struggled really before at work. I'd always found a way through, but like week after week I think I was just like, oh, this isn't getting better, or for me,
Yes.
the outcomes were coming out as we planned, but it wasn't getting any easier for me. And I thought, maybe after 3 months or so, it gets easier. And yeah, I look back and I just remember at the time I just thought, oh, I failed, this is awful. I've never failed at anything. But in the end, I didn't fail really. I just learned a lot.
Yes.
And I think if you can view those kinds of failings not as failings, but as
Yeah.
learnings, then you can take that forward. And it did take me some time to reflect on that. Like when we came back to London, I went back to doing some of the things that I was doing before. So looking after multiple clients at the time. And I had to really understand that. But then all of a sudden, I realized I had so much more empathy for people with families and people who were carers, and
Mm.
people had different choice, just chose to
Mm.
prioritize life over work, which I probably didn't have, like I did have before, but didn't have as much, or I wasn't as aware of it,
Right.
and I was so much more yeah, flexible about that stuff, I think,
And
afterwards,
that's
which I
really
think is
powerful,
helpful.
actually, isn't it? So that's a
Yeah.
great story of kind of going to the depths, feeling like you failed, having a really tough time, but actually it really enriched you as a leader and
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
woman, actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's what you've got to think about, all these different types of like navigating situations, whether you're male or like, male, female, or non-binary. Like you have to, if you walk away, you can walk away at the time with a negative perspective on it. You can walk away with your career not going just up and it goes, like a wave, you could see that as negative. You can see an experience like I had as really negative, or you could see, being in a kind of, taking feedback always as really negative. But actually, if you really try to think about it, I think, someone says like feedback's a gift. Some of these things are
Yes.
all just gifts. I think, you can walk away, and I know it's really hard to do that, and you might not be able to do it in that moment, but as long as you can get around that over
Yes.
time and
Yes.
really understand what it helped you do, I think that's how you build the resilience as
Yes.
well, in
Absolutely.
and that's how
And
you build experience. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And there's also that other saying, which is there's no such thing as failure.
Yeah.
There's only feedback in learning.
Yes, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and that's a
Yeah.
great story that illustrates that really.
Yeah. But it's hard at the time.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
would, yeah. So it's yeah, it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
So
So you were with ThoughtWorks for about 16 years, and then you moved on to Zühlke, another technology company,
yeah.
but stepping into a more senior role. So tell us about leaving one company where I presume there must have been a lot of affection and connection because you'd been there for so long, and
Mhm.
then moving to the new company that you're with now, Zühlke.
Yeah. It was quite a big step. I definitely was scared for sure, because when you've been somewhere so long, it's comfortable, right?
Yes.
For sure. But one of the reasons I left, which was no secret, is that I sort of felt like I wasn't learning anymore. And that's as we've discussed earlier on today, that's so important for me. Like, and I just felt like week on week I wasn't really honing my skills anymore, and I needed to go somewhere where I could not only put some of the things that I had already learned into practice somewhere else, but also to be in a really different environment. Like, so being in a new company, obviously you learn how to navigate in a whole different way. But it made me reflect on what some of the things that I'm good at, or my strengths are also, and also my weaknesses that I knew that I'd have to watch out for, in order to kind of, when I start, to have a kind of idea about what I needed to focus on. And one of the things that, and I think it's transferable skills. And I think it's also important to understand that, just because you're good in one company, it doesn't also mean that you're good in the next, because there's different structures, there's different
Yes.
environments, there's different politics, there's different expectations, and they don't know you, right?
Yes.
I had the beauty of being in a company when you're there for so long, like everyone knows you, right? And so that you've got a good you have a reputation that is positive, and so then even when there's a mistake or something, it's like, oh, but I know them, and they've got a really good track record. So when you go into a new company, you don't have that track record at all, and that was one of the things I was quite scared about. But I knew that one of the ways I got things done before, and I'm good at doing, is having a network, an internal network. And so that was really key for me to build up very quickly, is to
Yes.
understand, who people were, what they liked doing, like what they did, where they were in the company, and making sure that network was quite broad, and global as well.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that I think always helps when you start a new company, is to get to know people, right? Because you
Yes.
get to know people, you get their perspectives on the company, but also all of them have their own stories about the company that actually enrich your understanding of the company, but make you be able to, because obviously a big part of my role is being a great brand ambassador for the company and selling, being in this like a sales role. And you need to be able to really get to grips with explaining the company and understand the stories of the company.
Yes.
And so actually I went round, so my maybe it's a little nice tip for when you start a new company. I went around with my phone and got the voice memo thing on the iPhone, and
Yes.
everyone I met, I said, you need to tell me your best client story or your favorite client story. So I had, because I thought, well, it's been there for so long, I knew all the client stories and all, and I didn't know so many at Zühlke. And so then I have these voice memos of all these different people across different countries in Zühlke telling me their favorite client story, and I've got them recorded, and I would listen to them and get to know the stories of the company basically. And I
Yes.
did that over time, and it actually turned into an internal project that then we videoed people and recorded them and put them on the SharePoint site and things like that.
Oh,
So um,
fantastic.
turned it in. It was just a little like rough thing on my phone. I was like, don't worry, this is not going anywhere. It's not published.
And then it became a project.
So it became a project. So yeah, so that's kind of one of the things I think, doing that network and learning the stories of the company and really it helps you really understand the motivation of
Yes.
why people are there, what's
Yes.
important, what the values of the company are. I mean, everyone can read what values a company has on their piece of paper, on their mission statement, but then by talking to people, you get to understand how that's actually carried out day to day, or how that's implemented, which I
Yes.
think is really important in a kind of leadership role when you're joining there. I also knew that often when companies hire leaders from external companies and are brought in, there's like a organ rejection situation. It
Say
happens a
more
lot with
about
companies.
that.
So when people come in that are outside the culture but come into quite a senior role, there's
Right.
often like we call it organ rejection. And it happens. I saw it happen a lot, both in the businesses, like the client businesses I worked with, but also, at ThoughtWorks as well. So, because often companies have a very strong culture, and if you bring someone in externally to do a particular job, actually that if their culture isn't aligned, it can clash, or if they don't actually approach getting to know the company and the people in the right way, that can really clash. And so
Yes.
I was so aware that that could happen to me in the new company, and it's no one's fault. Like,
Yeah.
really, it just happens.
Yes.
But I thought, okay, well, I don't want this to happen to me here. I want to be successful in this new company that I've joined because they're super interesting and fascinating, and they're going on this cool global journey. And I thought, okay, well, so using these techniques of, really networking internally, really understanding the core values of the company, the core stories of the company was one part, but also just like really just getting to know people, just spending time in
Yes.
the lunchroom, eating lunch with everyone,
Yes.
and just not having any expectations of that, and just trying to be part of, one of everyone, because
Yes. Yes.
we all have something to give a company.
So I really hear very strongly how relational you are and how important it was to build those relationships.
Mhm.
And within about a year or so, you were promoted to CEO of the
Yes.
UK. And, ordinarily the CEO is supposedly the most isolated role
Mhm.
in any company. So it sounds like you've almost preempted that being isolated, but did you notice a difference when you were promoted to CEO?
I mean, you definitely the biggest difference I noticed was that you realize really all the hardest decisions come to you, and all the
Yeah,
like, yeah, you don't really get any of the fun ones like anymore. You definitely, yeah, you get the ones that like either people are not prepared to take without your input, or can't take,
yeah,
understandably. I think I was really lucky that I have some wing people, and in the UK business, but actually more globally as well in the company, who I really rely on a lot to just sometimes just have a really open conversation and tell them I'm having a hard day or a crap week, and they do the same. And I've got a couple of people that I go to for that, and it's so important to have that where they understand the context of the company. They're
Yes.
in the company, but they're really trusted members that that they're not going to go off and talk to other people. And I think in the CEO role, you have to have that. You can't. I think I'd really struggle if my only network was, I mean, of course I've got a really great network externally, as well as I've got a couple of groups of women we regularly have dinner, and they are from other companies, and so we talk obviously confidentially, but like help lean on each other for kind of some of the more challenging aspects that you get in the sort of CEO role. A lot of them are women actually, which is awesome. And there's other people I speak to as well, but I think you do need some people inside the company that understand the context that you can just have an open conversation with. And I'm really lucky that I have that. It's only a handful of people, but that really small network internally that you can have a coffee on a Friday morning and go, wow, that was a week, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they lift you up, right, when you need it, and then you'll lift them up when they need it. And because otherwise it's quite challenging. But ultimately they, a lot of them still can't take the decisions for you, and you have to make some calls.
Yeah.
Sometimes that that are nice, and sometimes they're not nice, and sometimes they're just neutral, and they're just decisions you have to make about the business. But yes, basically it's a little bit isolating, but a network helps, I think.
Yes, yes. And with Zühlke itself, you talk about a very exciting, globally expanding company. Is that what attracted you to them?
Yes, so I think a big part of what attracted me is they're not just do the software side of things, and actually the original sort of the original starting point for the company was in real engineering, in hardware, so creating
Yes.
products and services for clients. So for example, we helped create the milk frother for Nespresso that comes with your Nespresso machine, as an example, and that's one of the most famous things we've done. But what that means is the way that we problem solve doesn't just lead to having people who are software engineers and designers from in a software perspective, or apps and things like that, but actually we're thinking about it, or we can think about the problem from physical to digital.
Yeah.
And I think that's super interesting, particularly as we get into this age of AI and, data and, all this, there's more sensors and inputs, and everyone's got, phones and wearables and cameras and everything. I think this is a really interesting
Yes.
area, and obviously more and more devices are connected. And so I think it's just a really fascinating breadth that
Yes.
it didn't have at my previous company. It means you can solve problems really a bit differently. And also it means you have these physical things that you can use to tell stories. And it's so
Yes.
nice to just be able to pick up something, and when you have a client in the office, to be like, look at this, touch and feel this. This is something we
Yes.
did, but you
Yes.
also did this thing that you can't see, that's in some business, that we'll never be able to demonstrate because it's a piece of software that's inside their business.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think that's kind of what I like, and it's just basically this really lovely engineering roots, and that's obviously where I've come. I've come from more the software engineering side, but it's like problem solving, but using so much more breadth in doing that, and
Yeah.
then creating that innovation through that problem solving.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So,
Sounds a very exciting place to
yeah,
work.
yeah.
And you've always been an advocate for inclusivity. So you're already a role model by being a female CEO in a tech industry, but what are you doing to ensure the culture in Zühlke is inclusive?
Yeah, it's so I'm very excited that I just was able to take on the chair of our D&I board role across the group, which is very
Great.
good. So it means I get to really have a hand in some of that more directly. So we just had our first meeting or board meeting a couple of weeks ago, actually. And I think a big thing always in tech and in engineering is around the gender balance. And I think
Yeah.
that's going to be a big focus really for us, and it's where my passion kind of also lies. All the aspects of D&I are important, there's no doubt about it. But I think you can only really move the needle significantly if you have some focus. So
Yeah.
if you do a little bit everywhere, it'll feel like nothing ever moves. But if you do all that little bit in one place, all of a sudden you get a chunk that moves. And so
Right.
that's the approach that I'm intending to try to take, in that we kind of have a little bit of focus on that gender diversity side. And then I think one of the things that I found important in my experience is that it's not just about having the things like the groups or the teams calls that mean that you can check in with each other. It's actually really about core policy
Yes.
and process that is in the business. So what we do for different aspects of life stages, and making sure that that's fair for both
Yes.
women and men, and that there's also also opportunities for men to take, say, time out.
Yes.
When say maternity, paternity leave is an easy one to kind of focus on, but also that the interview process is much more visible, that there's women in the company, because we do have a good percentage of women in the company. It could be higher for sure, but the women are visible in the interview
Yeah.
process. It's not just the easy option of whoever's available, that we put some thought into that. And then there's other things like understanding how we communicate more transparently about some of the statistics we have, and how decisions we're making impact them one way or the other, so we can at least
Yes.
consciously make those decisions.
Yes.
We don't want to have quotas and things like that, but I think if you can understand a decision you're making and be able to simulate that in a way that this could do this to the pay gap, or this could do this to the percentage, what choice you can still make, the choice that's right for that situation, but you need to understand what the impact is. And at least
Fantastic.
brings that awareness up. So that's the hope there. And obviously, of course, the normal things around trying to encourage women into leadership roles and how we support that. But there's a
Yes.
lot more work to do there to understand how we do more of that, I think.
Fantastic. Well, it's fantastic that as CEO you are an advocate of this. I want to just finally touch on, because you've talked about your career very vividly, and I mean, there's so many insights that I think will benefit people listening to this podcast. So thank you for that. But I also want, you are a human, and you're very human in how you lead. You've got lots and lots of energy. But I also want to talk about, on more the personal side, that your husband went with you to Ecuador. You've got two children. How do you keep managing that balance and also look after your well-being as well?
Yeah, it's actually really hard. I mean, because really, in a role of a CEO, you are on all the time. I don't have the pleasure of really switching off. Yes, occasionally I try and do that on holiday. I say, please, I turn my phone off, I put it in my bag, and then a couple of people have like my private phone number, and it's like, in an emergency, call me. But please try and figure it out. And you're all like really smart people. I'm sure you don't actually need me for a lot of these things if I'm not there. So it's really hard. I have a lot of like around the clock support, from breakfast clubs at school to after school childminders, things like that. My husband also only works 4 days a week, which also helps us in our family setup, so that come the weekend that we've got a few of the jobs done and things like that. And he doesn't travel as much as I do, and I have to do quite a lot of travel. So I have to, that I'm lucky in a situation that I can put that care in place. And because I don't have my family are in Australia, and my husband's family are like an hour and a half away, and they do help when they can, but it's not like they're around the corner. So
Yes.
we don't have that luxury. So I definitely have a network of a lot of babysitters, essentially on my speed dial. I also have some really great local friends who have stepped in a few times. So I've made, through having kids locally, made a lovely network of other mums in the
Yes.
area, and dads actually. And there's actually a few of us mums. We go out the first Thursday of every month. We go for a wine, and it's whoever can come. So sometimes there's 3 of us, and sometimes there's 10 of us, and it's really nice. But I have relied on some of them when I've made a stuff up. I'm definitely not on top of all the school newsletters and everything. And sometimes my friends will text me and be like, "There is no school today. Don't take your children to school. It's an inset day,
Oh,
Ange."
they've
Like,
really got your back, haven't
they
they?
have, because I have actually taken my kids to school on an inset day before. Or like they'll, and one time I totally forgot my kids packed lunch, and one of my friends locally, she stepped in and brought my kids packed lunch to school. I had to call her because the school had called me. So and she was working from home and I was in the office. So yeah, I'm lucky enough to have that support. But I do think there's in saying that, and I know we spoke about this before, is that there's also a lot of hidden things, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
happen, I think, in these situations. And I've had a lot of health challenges over the last, I think, probably 10 years, but more recently in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think not many people at work are aware of them. I obviously my trusted kind of friends at work, I think, and obviously, you tell P and HR about these things, but I've had like 4 operations in the last few years, and some of them obviously had to take time off work. Some of them I've done on a weekend and then come back to work on a Monday because I've been lucky enough to fit it in that way, but also that I know that I can work from home for a couple of days and keep on top of things. But I
Yes.
think I think there's a lot of expectation on you in a role like mine, without the understanding that I am also a human, that I have a
Yes.
family, that I have to go to the doctor, probably a lot actually,
Yes.
and that I'm often changing medication, or I've just had this operation, like or something like that, and I might be recovered enough to come to work, but I might not be, fully ready to, might still be having challenges with sleep and or something
Yes.
like that. So I do think there's, we're often, in leadership roles, we're often asked the question, or there's a lot of expectation on us to be empathetic towards our employees, but
Yes.
actually we don't often get that empathy from, like, I think you do a lot, but I think a lot also you don't, because there's just, well, you're the CEO, you need to have this all sorted, like, and why are you not at work, or why are you not at the office today, or and so
Is there an expectation that a CEO you should be a bit more robotic then, and people don't make allowances for the fact that you're human and
yeah,
may have health
I think some
challenges?
people do, and I think some people don't. I think there's just
Yeah.
an assumption that because often they don't know you too, and
Yeah.
and it doesn't come from a place of pure expectation. I think often people feel that as a CEO they can't get to know me, whereas actually that's quite the opposite. Like, in the people who do come in and to the office regularly, as an example, and sit with me at lunch, know that I will sit and have a drink of wine with them after work, if or have a coffee, or if I can't do it now, I will set up time to speak to
Yes.
them another time. And I try and keep some time in my diary every week for these kind of more urgent, or not urgent, but just chats that people need
Yes.
to have.
Yes.
So I think the people that know me definitely have that empathy for me and understand, even if they don't know some of the health challenges or whatever
Yes.
that I've had.
Yes.
But I think the people that don't know you and just see you as a CEO, and then they're not connected with you as a human being, when you have these things where you're not there or off, or you need a little bit of adjustment, maybe for a couple of weeks because you're recovering, or you've got some things going on with your kids or family, or this
Yeah.
happens for carers all the time around the world. Maybe I feel sometimes like yeah, I don't know. To be honest, maybe I don't know what they're thinking, but yeah, I do feel at least that expectation is on me,
Yes.
even if it not really is
Well,
there,
I
even if I'm
suppose it's
imagining
because
it.
a CEO, the buck stops with you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're the one that makes those tough decisions. So people don't necessarily give the same amount of empathy to you. Maybe it's because they see the title, they see the letters CEO
Mhm.
rather than the human being. But it sounds like your approach and your leadership style is full of humanity and wanting to relate to people. So you
Yeah.
kind of almost have to live it in order
Yeah.
to get it across to people.
Yeah, and I definitely try. And I think I
Yeah.
don't get it right all the time. I can't say that. I don't think any CEO could say they get it right all the time. I've definitely made mistakes. I definitely make mistakes. And I don't necessarily, get every situation right. But but yeah, but I'm a human,
Yeah.
so that's the
Yeah.
case. And I think when people get to know me, they understand that I've got,
Yes.
the business and their best interests at heart. I think
Yes.
sometimes when they don't know you, that's when I think it's not just in a CEO role, to be honest, any leadership role. So it's been the case really for 10 years when they don't know you and you've made a decision, but you haven't been able to maybe communicate the why or the context or the situation. Like that's often where it's tricky. So, really
Yes.
trying and being transparent about why you make decisions
Yes.
is obviously really
Yes.
important as well.
Very important. But
Yeah.
also, thank you for being so open about this, because I think there are many people who maybe are dealing with difficult health issues and feel the need to not necessarily divulge that in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace, and also that we don't know what anyone's dealing with at any
Yeah.
given time, do we?
Yeah, when
Really?
someone turns up to work in the morning, whether that be online from home or in the office, you have no idea what their morning was like. And I
Yes.
think that's also what helps a little bit is going, okay, well, if they're, looking like they haven't had much sleep or they've been through the
Yes.
ringer, then maybe it's like, something's happened to them this morning and you
Yes.
just need to ask, are they okay? Yeah, and
Yes.
they might not want to tell you. They might say they're fine, but you've got to ask them that because
Yes.
I've definitely been in situations where I feel like I've been through the ringer before I turn
Yes.
up at work in the morning, and when no one asks, are you okay, or notices that, that it's okay, you
Yes.
expect that, but it's nice when they do, I
Yeah.
think is
Yeah.
the thing.
Fantastic. So, and we have had such an in-depth conversation. I've really enjoyed it. What are your parting words? What are your parting words of
Oh,
wisdom you'd like to pass on to people who maybe have a similar ambition to you, that they love the business world, they want to get ahead as a
yeah.
female leader? What would be your parting words?
So maybe I'll go back to a couple of things that I said throughout. I think is tell people what you want. Like
Yes.
have goals. I mean, you don't always have, they can change, throughout your career for sure. But try and have some clear goals, write them down, but tell people.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell people, you won't get that ad hoc help, from
Yes.
people who are just like, oh, you want to do this? I'll help you. So that would be my number one. I think every day is a new day. If you had a crap day yesterday, every day is a
Lovely.
new day.
Yeah.
I think that's how you've got to see it. Don't take yesterday into today or this week into next week.
Yeah.
Find a way to just let it go. Even if you have to still deal with something, put the feeling you had yesterday, particularly if it's a negative. I mean, if it's a negative feeling, more, leave it yesterday and just deal with it a bit more pragmatically
Yes.
today.
Yes.
Because I think if you carry that day to day or week to week, it builds up and you just explode
Yes.
basically
Yes.
eventually. So every day
Fantastic.
is a new day.
Lovely.
And probably the last thing is, yeah, just keep at it. Basically, working hard does help. Like I
Yes.
think nothing is given to you on a silver platter. You have to work. So
Yes. Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Great. Lovely. Thank you so much. And if people want to get in touch with you, how can they connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to do it. So maybe you could share
I'll share the
my links.
links
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
information that comes out with the podcast, and Zühlke. They can connect via Zühlke's website.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or
Yeah.
on our LinkedIn page as well. So
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
thanks for having me, Mary. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I've loved it. Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to the She Leads Collective podcast. If this episode resonated with you, follow the show or share it with a friend and leave a quick review below. Or leave us a comment. Change happens through conversation, so let's keep this one going. Listen out for the next episode and join me as we keep lifting the lid on the stories that matter. Take care and keep leading with heart.